Assalamualaikum and very good day. In this video, we are going to look at the step-by-step process in carrying out a task planning for test and examination by focusing specifically on science subject. And we carry out our task planning by filling up a table known as a table of specification. Before we move on further, just to put into perspective where we are in terms of assignment one, assignment one requires us to develop a classroom test. And in doing that, there are three documents that we need to prepare. The first one is a table of specification. The second one is question paper. And the third one is the answer scheme. All right. And the one that I'm showing at the moment would be the process that we go through in completing assignment one. All right. So previously, we have spent a couple of weeks looking at item construction based on specific levels on Bloom's taxonomy. All right. So in terms of the process of testing, so this would be the stages that we go through in carrying out all the works related to assignment one. And assignment one basically requires us to carry out a testing process. So before we can actually dive down constructing items for our tests, because tests and examinations are complex, they must be planned. And we plan our tests and examination by filling up a table, and this table is known as table of specification. And why do we need to plan for such documents? Because when we carry out our, or when we cakap dah salah kan, when we develop test and examinations, there are learning standards that we must fulfill. And for each learning standards, there must be sufficient number of items. We need to have various levels of taxonomy tagged by these items, and we need also to manipulate on various item types. Because of this complexity, it is better if we structure this process by filling up a table so that we know exactly which items are mapped to which learning standard dan sebagainya. Okay, so we will be filling up this table just in a moment. But before that, few things that I need to stress would be, when we plan for our assessment, it does improve the content validity and the phase validity of our assessment exponentially. Okay, and we only complete the table of specification for test and examination. For other assessment, we do not complete the TOS. There is a different table that we need to complete. So TOS is only for test and examination. Okay, and when we complete our TOS, it will be based on the learning standards in the curriculum document, and we will only select learning standards that are relevant under cognitive domain. Learning standards representing affective and psychomotor will not be considered for most of the time. Okay, and in the school, table of specification is known as jadual spesifikasi ujian. That's the term, that's the name in Bahasa Malaysia, and we call it JSU. So TOS and JSU are compulsory documents that teachers and lecturers must prepare and submit together with the test and examination when we submit to the faculty or school administration. So it is a requirement. And we do, or if you were to Google table of specifications, there are various formats, all right, and various templates. Whatever the format is, there will be some salient information that we must have in our TOS, and that would be listing down the content standards or learning standards measured by the test or exam. And we will also be mapping each learning standards to specific levels on Bloom's taxonomy. And that is why in the topic that we have for this particular semester, we look and learn how to develop items first, then only we carry out the test planning process. So where we are in terms of testing process as of this document, ataupun as of this video, would be here. The first stage of task planning, develop TOS dahulu. Please be mindful of the fact that we are just planning for the test. We are not developing or constructing the questions yet. We plan for our test first, and after we are done planning, after we have completed our table of specification, then only we construct our questions based on the listing of the items in our TOS. When we construct our items, we do not construct items. Kejap, panas. Turn on the aircon. When we construct our items, we do not construct our items based on the order or the arrangement of items in the task. We simply develop our items based on what we have listed in our table of specifications. So once this stage is completed, you will have a pool of items, but they have not been arranged, they have not been refined, no instructions whatsoever. So all of this arrangement, refining, and getting all of these items structured into a complete test set will be done during the process of test assembly. This is the process where we will refine, arrange, put in instructions and whatnot in until we have a complete question paper. All right. So at this point, we are only doing task planning. So I will save the yapping for the remaining things that I have in this slide later when we meet in class, because the main aim of this video is to provide you with the skills to develop a TOS or complete a TOS. Okay, marilah kita. So this would be the TOS template that I'm using for our class. This is also the same template that you will be using for assignment 1. Do not use other template because the information required might be different and it will cost you marks. All right. Please note that assignment 1 is 40% and TOS is 5% out of that 40%. So it's a lot. So make sure that you place your information correctly in this TOS. Okay, so before you ever attempt to do this TOS, because this is aligned to assignment 1, it is highly recommended that you approach this exercise within group setting. So find group members for assignment 1, decide on the subject that you want to assess, decide on the tingkatan for that subject, and after you have gotten all the information sorted out, then only you can fill up this TOS. So for group, okay, for group AD2474A, for example, from biology group, members, please write down the group member's name in full. Subject, I'm going to focus on science. All right. And I can't remember which form, maybe form 2. Let's just say form 2, eh? Okay. So now, this is the information that we need to put in our TOS. We will be copying and pasting the bidang or tajuk utama, and then the content standards, and then the learning standards. And for each of the learning standard, we need to specify further how many number of items, what are the item types, what's the marks, as well as the levels on Bloom's taxonomy. So the boxes are shaded in yellow are the levels on taxonomy of cognitive domain. We have remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. By the side here is just like a list of items for you to choose from. So we have a combination of objective and subjective items. Please remember that for assignment 1, when you develop your test, essay is not allowed. Okay, so you have a plethora of items that you can work on except for essay item. And just in case if you forget the kind of questions that represent each of these subjective items, just flip to the second page where we have sample of these items. We have actually developed the similar items when we did item construction exercises based on levels of Bloom's taxonomy. Okay, so short answer would be items in which the answer is about two to three or one to two sentences. This usually falls under remember item. Restricted response type would be items in which the length is about three to five sentences up to one to two paragraph. So they are called restricted response type to differentiate this item from the extended essay type, which is essay. Okay, so if you do have HOTS item, for example, analyze the differences between this and this, compare and contrast this and this in relation to apa-apa, for example, that would be the kind of items under restricted response type. Susah nak sebut kan? So I'm just going to call this item RRT or double RT. Okay, so let's start filling up our TOS. I will be referring to the learning standards for Form 2 based on the science subject. So I'm going to just put this on one side and then the DSKP for Form 2 on the other side. Okay, before that, let's just look at the SKP. So for 1 hour test, you can't afford to be asking too many bidang or tajuk utama. So I'm going to call this bidang ataupun tajuk utama lah kot ya. The term is bidang. Alright. So if this particular main topic has lots and lots of content standards, so within 1 hour test, you can only select 2 to 3 topics only. But if the topics are not a lot, for example, maybe 1 to 2 content standard content standards for each topic, then maybe you can select up to 4 main topics. All right. So we'll see the complexity and the comprehensiveness of each topic based on the number of content standard. And of course, we have content standards and also learning standards here. All right. So when you are selecting one particular main topic for the purpose of our test, you have to select all the content standards and learning standards for that particular topic, but you only select learning standards that are suitable and appropriate to be converted into questions for test and examination, meaning that we only select content standards and learning standards that represent cognitive domain and also learning standards that are relevant or appropriate to test and examination. Let me just give you some examples. For example, we have 233. Berkomunikasi mengenai contoh interaksi antara organisma hidup. It's my bad. I've selected the SKP in Bahasa Malaysia. I should have chosen one that is in English. But then, well, let's just move forward. So, berkomunikasi, this is a verb in which representing assignment, but not test or examination. And what would be the best assignment? It could be formal assessment. It can also be formative assessment in which no marks is required, but it is not meant to be captured or converted into item for test and examination. The best task for this would be presentation-based assessment. So because of that, these particular learning standards should not be selected for test and exam. Kalau select juga, it is not appropriate and I will deduct marks from your assignment. Okay, so we need to have the knowledge and comprehension in selecting the right learning standards. Let's look at 2 to 1, menghuraikan dan berkomunikasi. So because we have berkomunikasi here, it means that these particular learning standards should be captured by presentation-based assessment. But we also have menghuraikan di sini. So you have the options of selecting these standards because we can ask students questions, menghuraikan, in our test and exam. Okay, so be very careful when you are selecting learning standards, because we do not want to select incorrect learning standard as a basis of our assessment. Okay, so selection is one thing, but now let's move ahead with what we plan to do. So first of all, don't forget to copy paste the main topic. Make sure the numbering is also appearing in our TOS, because I need to know exactly from which part of the DSKP you have taken out this information from. So kalau ada tersalah ejaan, betul-betulkanlah. Okay. So 2.0, and then we need to select all of the content standards and learning standards. Kalau bersesuaian, of course the first one is sesuai. Menerangkan dengan contoh pengeluar, pengguna dan pengurai. Okay. I'm not going to be doing a complete TOS. I will just select a few as a basis of examples that you are clear of what are the kind of things that you need to do when you are completing this table. So just copy and paste first. Menginterpretasi rantaian makanan dan siratan makanan. Okay. Boleh. Mari kita copy paste. And then let's move on to the second one. Kitar nutrien dalam ekosistem. Eh, lupa. Okay. What I'm supposed to do is doing this. Mewajarkan, yes, this would be C5, evaluation questions based on the Bloom's taxonomy. Menyelesaikan masalah, yes, these can be questions for create, and that would be the highest level of Bloom's taxonomy. Okay, so let's look at 2.3, menjelaskan dengan contoh. Boleh, oleh itu mari kita copy paste. So it's just a copy paste fiesta without much thinking at this point of our life. Okay, so maybe we want to keep this rather separately from the upper one, so that we can really see the differences in terms of content standard. Mewajarkan, yes. Berkomunikasi, no. So let's say that I will just stop here. All right. So now let's say that I have copy pasted all of the content standards and learning standards that I want to include in my test. Remember that only learning standards that you have items in the test that must be included in our TOS. Learning standards that will not have item, you do not have to include in our TOS. All right. So remember that the name of this table is table of specification. So information presented in this table must be specific. Okay. Um, Pertama, menerangkan dengan contoh pengeluar, pengguna dan pengurai. So remember that each question or each item must only measure one aspect of learning. And we have three aspects of learning here. Okay, so before we can provide more information, we need to specify that learning standards further. Right? So I'm just going to use like a point form. Pengeluar, pengguna, pengurai. All right. So by doing this, we are saying that we will be producing different items for each of these. Okay. So after we have specified this further, then only we will be filling up this information here. Okay. So how many questions in our test that we want measuring pengeluar? Let's just say I nak dua soalan sebab ada banyak kategori pengeluar, katakanlah. So I'll just put in 2. And for these 2 items, what would be the item types? At this point, we have not developed the items yet. We have no idea in which section these questions will be appearing. What we want to detail is just that how many items should we have that measure which learning standards. That's our main concern. So if your TOS has question number, section number, at this point, your TOS will not be correct. Okay, so say for example, of the entire task, I want two items that measure pengeluar. All right, so for these two items, what would be the item type? Say, for example, both of the questions, I want them to be in multiple choice item format. And for both of these questions, because they are of similar item type, the mark should be the same. So it should be 1 mark for each multiple choice. So I have two. All right. So tiba terdiam Okay. And then I need to specify for these two items, what would be the levels on Bloom's taxonomy? How should we know? Can we just simply decide on whim? No. Look at the verb use in our learning standards. The verb says that menerangkan. Dan menerangkan or explain would be verb representing the second levels on Bloom's taxonomy, which is understanding. So what you do is you tick understanding. Okay. Pengguna. Pengguna pula. Let's just say that I just want to have one and then I want to use short answer. Okay. So just type in short answer and say, for example, I want to give 2 marks for this question. So 2 marks, one item multiply by 2 marks equals 2. Ni dah kenapa tak reti sifir. Alright. And then because it is still under the same learning standard, so it should be understanding. Okay. So this we do this. Let me just complete the first round first so that we can move on to other things after this. Let me just copy paste this. And it should also be understanding. Okay. So when I do it like this, it means that I will have specific questions for each aspect here. Okay, and don't forget your question must have contoh because this is what is required by the learning standards. Let's move on to the second learning standard. Menginterpretasi rantai makanan dan siratan makanan. Okay, so I tengah cari yang sesuai buat contoh yang lebih mudah supaya senang nak faham. Okay, tak apa. Alright. So, if this is our learning standards, there are two aspects that we need to look at. Rantai makanan dan siratan makanan. So, katakanlah, say for example, I do not want to come up with specific question for each. What I want to do is to have a question that measures both of these. For example, say for example, I want to ask, how does rantai makanan affects the supply of siratan makanan, katakanlah. So within that one item, I am looking at the relationship between this and this. If that is the case, I do not need to specify them further. Okay, so I can right away detail it here because this one item will be looking at both of these using one item. All right, so then it will be restricted response type. And this, because I'm looking at relationship, okay, so I should go with analysis. And because you are visible on my screen, okay, because this is analysis and it's hot and it is restricted response type. So one item multiply by 4 marks and I will get 4. Okay, you can do this, not a problem, as long as our question satisfy the intended verb indicated here. Okay, the verb in our learning standards basically dictate the minimum level of learning expected on the students. Kita boleh buat soal analysis, no problem. But the verb here is menginterpretasi. And menginterpretasi will be a verb at C2 level. Okay, sometimes I do call them C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, and C6 because that's the kind of language that we use, that we have for cognitive domain. So this is verb for understanding. Can we develop an item that is more difficult than this? No problem. Yes, you can. As long as we have taught or students have sufficient knowledge to answer the questions. But if you want to have analysis question, it's fine. But you must also have questions representing this learning standard. So maksudnya kena buat juga soalan pada aras 2. Okay, let me just push this down. Please note that the perincian by this side, the details by this side should be in the same alignment with the sub-learning standards that we have here. So since I need to come up with questions that measures understanding, so I need to specify rantai makanan and siratan makanan further specifically. They are not looking at relationship, jadi tak bolehlah campur sekali. So kena specifykan and break them down separately. So I'm just going to press this. Okay, rantai makanan. How many questions for rantai makanan that I want to have? See, for example, I want to have 2 items. Okay, for rantai makanan, out of these 2 items, one of the item would be short answer and the other item is RRT. So when it comes to table of specifications, we should not have any information left blank. Okay, so since we have short answer and RRT here, yang ni tak boleh terkonten dua macam ni so kena buat satu-satu. Okay, why so stringent, why so rigid? Okay, say for example I put in 3 here, then how are we supposed to know how many questions should I have for short answer, how many questions should I have for RRT? So it's always a good practice to make sure that each information is provided. Okay, kenapa nak kena strict sangat? Because usually teachers or panitia or department will produce TOS at the beginning of the year. Okay, di awal tahun PDP. Tapi we sit down and actually create our items much later. If our table of specification is not specific, we would have forgotten how many items for each if our TOS is not specific. Itu yang pertama. Yang kedua, because we want to make sure that all of the learning standards have been covered by items at the level that is comprehensive. And we can only determine the comprehensiveness of our task by having it specified in a more specific way. Okay, right, I'm yapping too much. And now we want to detail these particular learning standards into marks and whatnot. Okay, so what are the common errors that students usually do? They do not specify the learning standards in the most specific manner. When it is not specified specifically, so it defeats the purpose of having a table of specifications. All right, so maybe we can just attempt one more exercise for other learning standards kejap now. Mewajarkan, macam senang je. Okay. Alright. Mewajarkan peranan organisma dalam kitar air sesuatu ekosistem. So this is a specific learning standards on its own. We do not need to specify them further. You can just right away letak je kat sini. How many questions do we need that require students to justify the roles of organism or the functions of organism? So maybe 1. Okay, and because mewajarkan is hot, I do want students to provide explanation substantially. So I want to use RRT, restricted response type. I want them to present information ataupun jawab within one brief paragraph. Okay, so ni level apa? Gitu. So we need to decide our mark based on the level and also the length of answers expected. We have clarified that the answer should be about one brief paragraph. So that will be what? 3 to 5 sentences for one paragraph. And mewajarkan would be verb at C5, which is evaluation. Any verb mewajarkan usually is evaluation because you need to provide justification. All right. So we will be ticking evaluations, and then you need to give marks. It should be either 4 or 5 marks. So one item multiplied by 5 equals to 5. See how our marks increases for analysis. Ni dah lari-lari anak dia ni. For analysis, the marks that we are giving is 4. For evaluation and create, 5 should be the best marks to give depending on the length of answer expected. Alright, menyelesaikan masalah would be questions at create level. So when we are selecting our learning standards collectively across all the topics that you have, we want to develop items that cover all of the levels on Bloom's taxonomy. So make sure that you have selected learning standards yang ada verb yang sesuai untuk semua aras. Alright, so at the end of it, after you have completed all of the learning standards, we have broken down and specified each of these further, you have detailed the information here, do not forget to fill up the final row that we have here. Alright, please state the total number of items that you have, total up together all of the items that you have. So katakanlah 20. Alright, and this part you don't have to fill up because we do have various item types, but you must make sure that you total up the marks. So after you have total up, tiba markah 39. Macam pelik lah pula kan. So you look back at all the details that you have. Maybe you want to adjust one of your items to have more marks so that it will be nicely 40. All right. I have received questions asking what's the marks that should be included here. Tidak ada rule of thumb, boleh je letak berapa-berapa markah pun. You can put in 30, 40, 50 as long as they are nicely rounded to 40 ke 50 ke sebagai contoh. Alright, it can also be 100 but it will be just too much. And how many questions should we have? For total number of items. It will be very much dependent on the complexity of the item, the length of answer expected, as well as the levels on Bloom's taxonomy. But usually, if your main topics are about 3 main topics, should be sufficient, 2 to 3 main topics, it should be sufficient for a 1 hour test. Okay, and in assignment 1, we must have at least 10 multiple choice as well as at least 5 subjective. But having only that 15 items will not be sufficient. You need to add more, and you can also work on other objective item types as well. For example, if you are measuring biology, so you want to have labeling, for example. Okay, so you are highly recommended to include other item types, not necessarily just multiple choice questions for your objective option. All right, so for total number of items, it doesn't really matter if you have like 17 ataupun 23 because you will be broken down your items into sections later anyway. Right, and finally, for this, just place a tick for items that you have representing that particular levels on Bloom's taxonomy, but I am expecting that you have items for all levels. Okay, you don't have to indicate the number of items, for example. Excuse me. You only need to put in a tick because one tick here may not necessarily say that this is one item because it can be more than one item. Okay, I'm just interested to see whether you have covered all the levels of Bloom's taxonomy. All right, so that will be how you complete the table of specifications. It's fairly simple. It's about putting the correct information at the right place. All right. So that will be all for this particular video. I'll see you in class later. Take care. Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera.